Darkness reigned in the Imperium. The roiling clouds of crimson and shadow twisted and swirled in grotesque, unnatural ways, whispering ancient truths and maddening lies in equal measure. Here, where gods walked and demons fed on the unguarded thoughts of mortals, something stirred, something wholly alien to this place of nightmares and prayer. It was not shaped by emotion, it was not formed by faith. It was a presence, calm, precise, eternal. A ripple, then a tear. The warp convulsed, psychic currents screamed, stars dimmed. And through that rupture in reality came a force older than chaos, older than the first sparks of mortal thought. It was not rage, it was not malice. It was hunger, cold, orderly, impossibly ancient. In a galaxy where gods feasted on souls and war was the only law, something else now arrived, beyond hate, beyond mercy, beyond comprehension. The world of Vidium Prime drifted silently in segmentum obscurus, an oceanic jewel orbited by weather-worn moons. Once a forge colony, it had become a quiet shrine world, its rusted manufactorums converted into cathedrals, its factorums now filled with incense and worship. On its largest continent, the city of Halassar rose from basalt cliffs like a serrated crown. White-robed pilgrims trudged up the 1,000 steps of the Basilica Imperator, where golden aquillas hung over narrow archways and incense clouds rolled like battlefield smoke. Above this world, the sky began to shimmer. In orbit, sensors aboard the defense platform Fort Varnax shorted and sparked. Machine spirits screamed into the cogitator arrays. Binary prayers scrolled faster than logic could pass. One by one, Vox-picked screens went black. And then, a blinding pulse of silver light. He had appeared. The void shimmered. A brilliant silhouette tore through the veil of space like a shooting star made of thought and fire. Riding a gleaming board that cut through the void without resistance, the Silver Surfer emerged above Vidium Prime. Tall, statuesque, and radiant with power that defied classification. He hovered high above the planet's atmosphere, motionless, as if pausing to listen to the heartbeat of the world below. His eyes were solemn, reflecting the shimmering auroras forming in his wake. All around him, the vacuum shimmered with residual energy. Wherever he passed, space itself seemed to sigh. He looked down. Another world, he thought. His voice was not carried by sound, but by will. Another flame soon to be extinguished. Below, the people of Vidium Prime looked to the sky. Some saw the silver streak and fell to their knees in awe, thinking it a sign from the Emperor himself. Others cried out, prophets and madmen alike, proclaiming omens of ruin. Within the regimental command bunker of Vidium Prime's defensive forces, alarms screamed. Officers shouted over one another. Auspex displays blurred and crackled. Every orbital auger flared with anomalous readings. General Lorik Vandred, a grizzled veteran with augmetic arms and a no-nonsense stare, slammed his fist on the command table. I want thunderbolts in the air now. Scramble all Valkyries and lock down the lower hives. I want orbital cannons charged and ready. Sir, the target isn't hostile, an officer stammered. It's just hovering. Vandred turned, steel in his eyes. Then we'll give it a reason to move. Above the city of Halasar, the Silver Surfer descended. Flocks of sacred carrion birds scattered. Spires cracked from the force of his arrival. Vox hymns faltered mid-chant. He came to rest above the grand plaza, his form radiant, casting a long shadow across the stone statues of saints and martyrs. Tens of thousands looked up in silent terror. He spoke, not in words, but in minds. People of Vidium Prime, came the voice, smooth as starlight. Hear me. I am the Herald of the End. I come not to bring destruction, but to announce it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My master approaches. He is not a demon. He is not a god. He is the balance, the hunger, the truth of entropy. Galactus. A young preacher screamed from the steps of the basilica. Blasphemy, heresy, the Emperor protects. He hurled a censer upward. The surfer caught it in mid-air with a gesture, then gently lowered it back to the preacher's feet. Your gods cannot stop what comes, not out of cruelty, but because it is necessary. From the city's edge, armor growled. Columns of Leman Russ battle tanks and Chimera transports rolled toward the plaza. Overhead, Valkyries shrieked across the sky. The 131st Viridian Steel Guard advanced with precision born of decades of war. General Vandred's voice roared from the Vox speakers. All units, target the Xenos abomination. Fire at will. Cannons boomed, and rockets flared. But the Silver Surfer stood unmoving. The first shell reached him, and dissolved. The next exploded in harmless light. Lasfire struck a shimmering barrier and dissipated like mist on a furnace. He raised a hand. The entire battlefield froze. Tanks groaned. Weapons crumbled into rusted fragments. Valkyries halted mid-flight, gently lowered to the rooftops by unseen force. The soldiers found their arms numb, their knees buckling. And then it passed. No lives lost, only silence. The surfer turned toward the soldiers, who now knelt or cowered behind wrecked barricades. You fight with courage, but courage is not enough. I do not wish your deaths, but I cannot stop what is to come. He rose again, higher into the clouds. Beyond the planetary edge, deep in the void of Segmentum Obscurus, the darkness began to shift. Stars disappeared. The light retreated. And in that blackness, Galactus stirred. He was not yet fully visible, only hints of a shape, a silhouette of monstrous scale, the outline of a helmet larger than cities, the flare of a cosmic core that devoured starlight. The surfer returned to him like a mote returning to the tide. He hovered before the rising god thing. The planet is ready, he said softly. Galactus said nothing. He did not need to. His engines awoke, reality bent, and somewhere far away, the warp trembled. Back on Vidium Prime, the sky darkened, and the stars blinked out one by one. Atop the Basilica Imperator, the golden statue of the Emperor cracked at the crown. Pilgrims wailed. Soldiers fell back in confusion. The Psykers of the Scholastica Psychona clutched their heads and howled. In the heavens above, a shape far too vast to comprehend began to take form. Galactus had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. Above the trembling world of Vidium Prime, the void itself recoiled as the shape in the dark took form. Galactus was no longer just a concept, no longer a myth whispered by ancient Xenos civilizations. Now he was real, monstrous and infinite. The first to see him were the orbital Auga technicians aboard Fort Varnax. They had no time to report. Their screens filled with a pulsing, blinding corona of impossible colour. Light that wasn't light. Sound that wasn't sound. The station's shielding shattered without a whisper. Fort Varnax disintegrated into a cloud of dust, scattering like ash on the solar wind. From the surface of Vidium Prime, Galactus eclipsed the heavens. His silhouette blotted out constellations, his vast limbs rimmed with crackling energy. His armour gleamed with the raw power of dying stars. Where his eyes should have been, there was only swirling galaxies, devouring and reborn. The conversion engines unfolded from his chest like petals from an apocalyptic flower. They turned slowly, geometrically perfect, rearranging the fabric of space itself. Rings of gravitational distortion rippled outward, causing tides to rise unnaturally, fault lines to quake, and clouds to spiral into unnatural shapes. General Vandred stood atop the outer bastion of Helisar's defensive wall, staring up into the storm-choked heavens. His men had regrouped, assembling every remaining weapon the PDF could muster: Hydra flat cannons, plasma destroyers, repurposed void shields, and even ancient cyclonic torpedoes, normally sealed under ecclesiastic lock. "Aim everything at the centre mass," Vandred barked, his voice hoarse. "If we are to die, we will die fighting." Across Vidium Prime, a desperate storm of fire and steel lit the skies. Missile silos groaned as ancient mechanisms unlocked, gears grinding like the death throes of titans. Hatches opened with seismic finality, revealing payloads of plasma warheads, cyclonic torpedoes, and orbital disruptors. The order had been given: total retaliatory strike. Columns of fire erupted from launch pads, scorching the heavens. The atmosphere boiled with contrails and fury. Thunderbolt fighters streaked upward in furious squadrons, their engines shrieking with strain. From the spires of Hive cities and the cliffs of forgotten fortresses, Earthshaker cannons and macro artillery opened fire in salvos that shook the planet. Across the oceans, submerged weapon platforms breached the waves like leviathans, loosing barrage after barrage of atomic fury. The entire planet had become a single weapon, hurling everything it had at the approaching god. From the stratosphere, the Silver Surfer watched. He hovered silently above the unfolding calamity, his gleaming body reflecting the rising infernos below. His face, serene yet sorrowful, betrayed the weight he carried, not as executioner, but as witness. He had warned them, and they had responded with rage. A sea of fire rose to meet the void, but Galactus did not move. He did not raise a shield. He did not strike back. He did not even acknowledge it. The first wave of missiles struck his outer conversion array and vanished. Explosions that should have scarred the stars were simply gone, absorbed, unraveled, devoured before they could reach his colossal body. Thunderbolt fighters melted mid-flight, reduced to rivulets of plasma and metal. Disruptor beams bent around Galactus like water around a monolith. Space itself rippled and bent to his will. One brave regiment of guardsmen, the 98th Viridian Skyclads, deployed grav chutes from Valkyries and landed atop the Ironjaw Ridge, setting up ancient Titan-class las batteries. General Vandred had called it their last teeth. They fired. Lances of energy bright enough to rival the sun carved across the sky and struck Galactus's knee. And then, the ridge was gone. No sound, no blast, just gone. A deletion, as if some cosmic editor had decided that the mountain, the regiment, and their last stand no longer had a place in the story. In the grand cathedral of Halazar, Cardinal Vex fell to his knees before the towering statue of the Emperor. "Deliver us, O Golden One. Shine thy fury upon the Xenos. Prove that you watch. Prove." The statue cracked with a sound like thunder, its marble crown shattered, raining debris onto the altar. One of the Emperor's outstretched hands crumbled and fell, severed at the wrist. Above the clouds, Galactus moved. His engines, vast, black, geometries folded through dimensions, began to unfurl. The air shimmered. Time itself seemed to stretch. A deep subharmonic vibration pulsed outward, rolling across Vidium Prime in concentric waves. The oceans boiled at the coasts. Sky whales burst mid-flight. Pilgrims collapsed in the streets, clutching their heads. Psychers across the planet, those in sanctioned temples and those hidden in underhive alleys, began to scream. From the buried vaults beneath the Scholastica Psychona, the final transmission began. Tech priests, their robes soaked with sweat and blood, chanted binaric prayers as they linked their minds with the psychic relays. Massive cogitators hummed and glowed. The final signal raced outward into the void. To any Imperial forces in Segmentum Obscurus, this is Vidium Prime. We are under attack by a force unlike any encountered. Not chaos, not Xenos. Something colder, something inevitable. We have fired all defences. They are ineffective. Repeat, ineffective. Civilian evacuation underway to Sanctum Vaults 1 through 5. If this reaches Terra, know that we faced a god and failed. General Vandred stood alone now in the command bunker, lit only by emergency lumen strips and guttering candles. The brass-framed tactical display showed nothing but static. The last of his officers lay slumped over control panels. His voxcaster sparked and fizzed before falling silent forever. Outside the armoured walls, the last units of the Steel Guard held the Halazar Gate, not against invaders, but against the void itself. Vandred removed his battered officer's cap. drew out a small, worn rosarius from within his coat. He kissed it. For the throne. The air vibrated. A beam of impossible energy lanced down from Galactus's engines. It was not heat. It was not plasma. It was not radiation. It was uncreation. The Basilica Imperator was the first to go. One moment it stirred in sanctified glory. The next, it was a memory. The stone, the iron, the stained glass, the relics, the worshippers, all reduced to base particles and consumed by the endless hunger. Plazas crumbled into ash. Roads melted into the earth. Towers were vaporized. Entire hive cities vanished like candle flames in a storm. The planet's crust groaned. Gravity fluctuated. Oceans were lifted into the sky, shattered into droplets and disintegrated. Across the globe, civilization unraveled. The Silver Surfer turned his gaze. He could not watch any longer. He closed his eyes and ascended once more into the stars. Above the atmosphere, Galactus loomed. Larger than comprehension, impossibly still, completely unfeeling. He did not rage, he did not mock. He consumed, because that is what he is. A god not of vengeance, but of balance. In the cold silence of space, far beyond the dying planet, a signal danced across the stars. It reached a listening post, a hidden relay on the fringe of Segmentum Obscurus. A solitary astropath, seated in meditative trance, gasped as the message hit her mind like a thunderclap. She convulsed. Blood trickled from her nose. Then she screamed. In the command sanctum of Imperial Outpost Telvar 9, a Vox adept sprinted through vaulted corridors lined with servo skulls and purity seals. His robe was scorched. His fingers trembled. He burst into the strategium. Sir, priority echo transmission. High urgency. Lord Commander Helbrecht looked up. Ancient, iron-eyed, decorated with the scars of countless campaigns. He raised an eyebrow. Another distress call. The adept shook his head, his voice hollow. No, my lord. Not distress. Annihilation. Helbrecht frowned. Chaos again. Tyranids. The adept passed him the data slate. His hands didn't stop shaking. You must hear it for yourself. Helbrecht listened. His face darkened. His mouth tightened. When the recording finished, he handed the slate to his second-in-command without a word. He looked to the High Command Eye, where strategic hololiths mapped hundreds of star systems. Assemble the council. Now, my lord. Now. We must inform the High Lords. He stepped to the window, gazing out into the void. I believe we've just witnessed the return of something the galaxy is utterly unprepared for. Outside, the stars glittered like fireflies, but one among them had gone dark. In the cold abyss of Segmentum Obscurus, silence reigned where once a world had thrived. Vidium Prime, once a bastion of faith and fervour, was now a lifeless husk, its surface smooth and lifeless, stripped of atmosphere, oceans and soul. Only a lingering gravitational echo marked where the planet had been. No Vox traffic, no astropathic hum, no life. The battle group Imperialis Vindicta dropped out of warp with a surge of golden light. 30 vessels strong, It had been dispatched by order of the High Lords themselves, led by Lord Admiral Athen Varax, aboard the Gloriana-class strike cruiser, the Justicar Eternal. The fleet included 5 Lunar-class cruisers, 2 Overlord-class command ships, a Mechanicus Arc Mechanicus, and a full wing of Nova and Cobra escorts. As the ships stabilized from warp transition, Sensorium officers stared in disbelief. "My God, Emperor," one whispered aboard the Lance of Calth. "It's dead. The whole world is dead." "Auspex confirms it," said Magos Tyron, his binaric tone flat. "Vidium Prime is no longer habitable. Estimated time since event, 11 hours. Aboard the Justicar Eternal, Admiral Varax gripped the edge of the hollow projection table. "Any warp residue? Tyranid spores, chaos trace?" "Negative on all counts," replied his senior navigator. "But there is something." The hololith shimmered, a trail of exotic particles, brilliant and unnatural, drifted like a comet trail through space. Cosmic energy, not warp, not known Xenos. "Track it," Varax ordered. "Full burn. Launch the long-range probes. We follow it." 3 hours later, at the edge of the Feldros expanse, the Imperialis Vindicta cruised through the silent reaches of Segmentum Obscurus at flank speed, her massive engines casting cerulean wakes in the void. The crew aboard each vessel operated with grim efficiency. They were Astartes trained, veteran voidfarers, used to fighting Orc hulks, Tyranid tendrils, and the horrors of the warp. But this mission was different. Admiral Varax, a broad-shouldered figure in a reinforced command throne, watched the energy readouts flicker, with an intensity few in the Imperium dared confront. He bore the scars of 40 planetary engagements, a veteran of the Third Thulian Reclamation and the Arcos incursion. But the signal they followed now chilled even him. A trail of silver energy, resonating like the aftermath of a collapsing star, twisted like ghost light through the void. But then, the trail stabilized. "Object detected," called out the Auspex officer. "Bearing 314 by Vector 09. A single humanoid entity, emitting cosmic radiation equivalent to a Class 9 stellar event." "Put the visuals on screen," Varax ordered. The hololith shimmered, and there he was. Floating alone in the dark, the Silver Surfer drifted, as still as a prayer unanswered. His radiant form gleamed like forged silver, sculpted into divine symmetry. No armor, no suit, no visible means of propulsion, only a sleek, glinting board beneath his feet, slicing effortlessly through space as though it answered to his thoughts. His eyes were deep pools of melancholy, not cruel, not warm, just tired. "That matches the transmission from Vidium Prime," confirmed the Vox Adept, his fingers dancing across the rune station. "It's him, the Herald." Varax rose from his throne, every servo in his command plate growling. "All ships, weapons live. Target the Xenos entity. Fire at will." The order rippled through the fleet. Lance batteries came alive, lighting the dark with lines of starfire. Plasma torpedoes surged from recessed bays, burning green and blue through the silence. Macro cannons boomed, their recoils sending shudders down kilometre-long spines of steel. the void became a battlefield of light and fury, and the Silver Surfer moved. But it was not movement as understood by mortals. He vanished, leaving after images like glimmers on water. Torpedoes turned to trails of fire chasing a ghost. Lances stabbed at the vacuum and struck only darkness. He twisted through the barrage with elegance that mocked physics, folding between dimensions, phasing between bolts. A Cobra-class destroyer, Glory's Fang, fired a full spread. The Surfer passed between them, flicking a hand. The energy turned, reversed, and detonated against the destroyer's own engine. The ship spun, powerless. The Surfer did not destroy, he disarmed. The cruiser Wrath of Soul charged its plasma array. The Surfer flew past, trailing his hand through the weapon housing. The coils cracked, melted, then harmlessly dimmed. No explosion, no death, only silence. "He's disabling our weapons," cried a panicked tech priest aboard the Sword of Byzant. Not killing, not retaliating, just disabling. Within 90 seconds, 7 ships floated inert, their reactors humming, but their armaments were dead. On the Justicar Eternal, Varax gritted his teeth. "Keep firing," he roared. "Bring the Nova Cannon online, now." The command was received by the Vigilant Oath, a venerable Mars-patterned strike cruiser. Beneath its armoured hull, servitors screamed as plasma feeds charged the mighty Nova weapon. Machine spirits howled, energy coiled in ritual spirals of ignition. Nova Cannon at full charge. Fire. A bolt of power, unlike anything seen in 1,000 sectors, tore through the heavens. It split reality, tearing a hole through subspace as it roared toward the Silver Surfer, like the judgment of the Emperor himself. The Surfer turned, he raised his hand, and for the first time, he shuddered. The energy struck him mid-flight. Arcs of cosmic fire ripped across his chest. His board spun out of control. The silvery glow that clung to him flickered. His body reeled backward, light dimming. He fell. The Surfer dropped from the stars like a meteor. Cheers erupted on the bridges of every working ship. "Target down! Target down!" cried an officer aboard the Justicar Eternal, pounding his chest. But then, the void screamed. Sirens howled. Auspex arrays scrambled. Binary systems spat gibberish. "New energy signature," the comms officer gasped. "Sector Alpha 9, it's by the throne. It's huge." The hololith flickered. It struggled to render an image. Then space began to bend. The stars twisted, not from motion, but from absence. A black rift formed, not like a warp rift. There was no madness, no demons, just vast, impossible weight. Galactus had arrived. The battle group's sensors broke trying to measure him. He didn't move as ships do. He just was. A cosmic titan of unfathomable scale. His presence eclipsed planets. His limbs like cityscapes. Armor that shimmered with starlight. His helm, crowned in antediluvian geometry, slowly turned. And the fleet felt him. Not visually, not sonically, psychically. Every mind aboard the Imperialis Vindicta, from the lowliest servitor to Admiral Varax himself, they all felt the weight of Galactus. like being buried under eons, like looking into the concept of extinction and knowing it now had a name. Galactus had followed the Surfer. He had seen the attack, and he was hungry. The bridge of the Justicar Eternal fell silent. No more cheering. Only dread. Admiral Varax turned slowly to his astropath. "Get this on record," he said, his voice hoarse. The astropath, already bleeding from the nose, nodded weakly. Varax looked back to the viewport, where the stars themselves seemed to dim. "In the Emperor's name, what have we brought upon ourselves?" Space itself groaned beneath his presence. Galactus hovered above the battle group Imperialis Vindicta, vast and terrible, a force not of wrath, but of inevitability. Stars dimmed, gravity bowed. The data screens aboard every ship flickered with ghost code, as if the machine spirit itself struggled to comprehend what loomed beyond the void. Aboard the Justicar Eternal, Admiral Ethan Varax stood motionless. The cheers from mere moments earlier had died down to nothing. Where triumph had been, now there was only a silence deeper than the void. The Silver Surfer's body still drifted, dimmed, scorched, tumbling. But it was not the fallen Herald that held their gaze. It was the god that had followed. Galactus. His massive form dominated the heavens. Light bent around him, colours shattering into spectrums unknown. His armour crackled with the raw entropy of consumed stars. Rings of gravitational resonance spun slowly around his midsection, like the arms of a black hole. His eyes, if they were eyes, were twin galaxies, swirling and ancient. And then he spoke. Not through vox, not through sound, but through thought, broadcast directly into the minds of every sentient aboard the fleet. It was not pain, it was not language, it was understanding. "This domain is now beneath my gaze. You will leave. You will not harm my herald." The message was brief, emotionless, not a threat, not even an order. It was a declaration, a universal truth, spoken with all the weight of the cold cosmos behind it. And then, the Imperium replied. Admiral Varax's voice crackled across all fleet channels. "Fire everything." The Imperialis Vindicta moved as one. Nova cannons fired again, great bolts of annihilation tearing across space. Lance batteries speared forward in synchronized phalanxes of plasma fire. Macro cannons thundered, cyclonic warheads launched. Even the Arc Mechanicus unleashed its hidden arsenal. Graviton imploders, Dark Age Matter-Lancers, and forbidden Mechanicum relics that had not seen the void in 10,000 years. The stars vanished in the fury, and Galactus moved a hand. He did not raise a shield. There was no barrier, no flashing void field. Instead, space obeyed him. The entire salvo stopped mid-flight. Every torpedo, every beam, every projectile, frozen in space as if time itself had obeyed his will. They hung there, suspended in a curtain of violence. And then they collapsed, like dust into a singularity. Every weapon disintegrated. Molecular cohesion broke. Energy bled away. The fury of the Imperium simply ceased to exist. On every bridge, alarms screamed. Power levels plummeted, cogitators shut down and rebooted in cycles of error. The machine spirits of entire ships wailed in binary agony. And then, the Silver Surfer opened his eyes. Pain lanced through him. He was not used to it. Not truly. Not since his transformation. But he had been struck by a god spear of light. He inhaled through lungs that needed no air. The power cosmic stirred. His board found him. With a thought, he rose. The glow returned, faint at first, then brighter, silver, radiant and fluid, like the light of a moon being reforged in orbit. He looked down at the fleet. They had tried. They were still trying. Another volley launched, slower now, damaged and misaligned. He exhaled, and then he moved. To the crew of the Lance of Calth, it was as if the stars themselves had been spliced in half. The Silver Surfer streaked past, a comet of silver flame, moving at speeds that ruptured every scanner. He flew through the gravitic exhaust of an Overlord-class cruiser. He weaved between macro barrels and touched the prow of the Faith Unyielding. Its engines died. He moved on. One by one, ship after ship, he disabled them. Always precise, always clean. No reactors breached, no souls lost. Only power drained, systems unraveled. Warp coils collapsed into dormancy. He passed through the heart of the fleet like a wraith of justice. A Mechanicus vessel attempted to deploy a vortex weapon, but the Surfer touched the device before it activated. It simply unraveled into atoms. Within minutes, the entire battle group drifted. 30 ships, silent, weaponless, defenseless. The Surfer turned. Behind him, Galactus waited. His god was patient. The Herald returned to his side. Together they departed. There was no sound. There was no signature. There was only the weight of absence. On the Justicar Eternal, the backup cogitators flickered back to life. The bridge was dim. Smoke curled from ruined consoles. Admiral Varax sat slumped in his command throne. Not dead, just defeated. The astropath, now pale and trembling, wept silently into his robes. "Get a signal out," Varax rasped. The Vox Adept looked up. "Sir? We are stranded. We cannot move. We cannot fight." He pointed to the relay. "Send it. Every channel. Echo-level broadcast." The Adept nodded. Priority Omega. From Imperialis Vindicta. Strike group disabled in Sector Fel 924A. Non-warp entity was engaged and has overwhelmed Imperium forces, requesting assistance or extraction. Emperor protect. The echo of the transmission had raced across the stars like a dying breath, urgent, ragged, and unignorable. Now, after crossing the immeasurable gulfs of the Imperium, it had arrived at its terminus, the heart of humanity, Terra, the cradle of mankind, Throneworld of the Emperor himself. In the deepest chamber of the Strategium Maxima, far beneath the gleaming towers and sky-piercing spires of the Imperial Palace, the last fragments of the Imperialis Vindicta's report flickered into silence. The room, vast and shadowed, was constructed from adamantium, gold steel, and stone carved before old Earth had known gunpowder. Banks of cogitators lined the walls, their screens dim, their data spools still. Hololithic projectors floated silently, casting the final moments of the transmission in ghostly blue. Jagged auspex scans, frantic vox bursts, and the last words of a broken crew. Standing alone at the centre, hands clasped behind his back, was Roboute Guilliman, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, Primarch of the 13th Legion, Regent of mankind. His armour shone in the gloom like a walking cathedral, wrought in cobalt, trimmed with oromite, layered with purity seals older than entire civilizations. Every inch of his form radiated quiet authority, though his eyes, fixed on the final line of the report, betrayed a weight even a demigod struggled to bear. Galactus, a name spoken in terror, a being of impossible size, unrecorded, uncatalogued, but very real. Gilliman's expression did not shift, but the tension behind his eyes deepened. He had seen countless threats rise from the abyss. Demons, heretics, Xenos monstrosities, ancient horrors dredged from the darkest corners of the galaxy. But this was different. This was not invasion, not subjugation, not vengeance. This was a force of nature. Aboard the flickering hololith, the transmission played over and over again. The words lingered like ash on cold air. Gilliman stepped forward, his footsteps echoing like thunder across the chamber floor. He approached the data spire, its central node wrapping in pulsing sacred circuitry. "Log the name," he said quietly, though his voice was iron-willed. "Galactus. Classify under Omega Black. Eyes only." A nearby servo skull, haloed with luminous purity runes, beamed in affirmation and vanished down a corridor to relay the order through encrypted channels. Gilliman's eyes returned to the empty hololith. The fleet was gone, the planet was gone, and all that remained was a name whispered into silence. He turned to another skull. "Summon the High Lords of Terra, full council, no delay." The servo skull flared red and darted off into the darkness. "Alert the Ordo Xenos, highest classification." A second skull moved to comply. "And inform the Librarius Imperialis," he continued. "Begin a search of all pre-Imperium records, forbidden texts, Dark Age vaults. I want everything. Any myth, any anomaly, any echo that might whisper of something like this." Gilliman stood in stillness for a long moment. A lesser man would have bowed beneath the dread, but he had shouldered the burden of a dying Imperium since his resurrection, fighting not just wars, but entropy, stagnation, corruption. Every hour, every breath, another thread held the galaxy from collapse. Weeks passed. Time, a slow grindstone, wore at the already fraying edges of the Imperium's hope. From the walls of the Strategium Maxima to the deepest vaults of the Librarius Imperialis, the name Galactus echoed like a cursed litany. Roboute Guilliman, Regent of mankind, had mobilized every agency of the Imperium. The Order Xenos, the Mechanicus, even the black ships of the Astra Telepathica were placed on high alert. Entire forge worlds shifted focus to decoding energy traces that defied categorization. Fleet commands from across Segmentum Obscurus were restructured into observation and rapid response task forces. Every report that trickled in described one unthinkable truth. Planets were vanishing, gone without warp disturbance, without chaos taint, and without warning. Galactus was moving. Giliman had exhausted diplomacy and action. He had turned, finally, to the impossible. The hall of the Emperor was quiet, save for the steady hum of dying machinery. Tens of thousands of adepts laboured endlessly to maintain the throne, their souls slowly consumed by its demands. Roboute Guilliman knelt before the radiant corpse of his father. "You brought humanity through its darkest night," he whispered. "You gave us purpose, unity, fire." He looked up at the golden husk, eternally suspended in failing divinity. "But we are not enough. Not anymore. This Devourer, he is beyond our understanding. A force of physics and hunger, not of the warp, not of reason." Silence. He bowed his head. "You must speak to me. If there is ever to be a time when your voice is needed, it is now." But the throne gave nothing. No whisper, no light, not even a flicker of psychic acknowledgement. Just the hum of the engines, the choking incense, the endless silence of a god who would not answer. Gilliman rose without a word, and left the chamber with a storm behind his eyes. 1 week later, Segmentum Tempestus. The astropathic pulse reached Terra through reinforced null relays. From outpost designate C-94, planet Luthorus 7, Galactus sighting confirmed. Planets Paranex, Corval, and Rhianora consumed. Additional detection: Tyranid Hive Fleet Kraken Subfork Phoenixes changing course. Trajectory: direct interception vector toward Galactus entity. Gilliman stood before the transmission, flanked by Magos Lexithor of the Adeptus Mechanicus and Inquisitor Zadrix of the Order Xenos. The room's hollow displays were chaotic, showing trajectories, energy scans, Hive Fleet movement predictions, and eerie renderings of Galactus suspended over entire worlds. "They're converging," Zadrix muttered. "The Tyranids, they see him. They know what he is." Lexithor's voice crackled in Binaric. "Our analysis concurs. The hive mind perceives Galactus as a rival apex predator. It may be acting not out of defense, but out of territoriality." Gilliman narrowed his eyes. "They seek to destroy him, or consume him." "Perhaps both," Zadrix whispered. "If the Tyranids can harm him, we may learn how." Gilliman turned to the Vox Servitor. "Monitor everything. Full spectrum. Maximum coverage. I want Auspec's boys seeded across the entire frontier." He stared at the galactic edge on the display. "Observe. Do not engage. If this is a war between gods, let us learn their weaknesses first." On the galactic rim, thousands of light years from Terra, a dead star drifted in the dark. A sun long faded into cinders, and beside it, like a wound in creation, hovered Galactus. The Silver Surfer circled in solemn arcs, his board cutting ribbons of glowing trails through the void. Around them, dust clouds shimmered, ionized by the faint radiations of worlds that had been. Then the Tyranids came. Hive Fleet Phoenixes emerged not from the warp, but from shadow space, tunneling through gravity seams like sharks breaching from beneath ice. First, a dozen bioships, then 100, then thousands. The stars vanished beneath their bulk, chitin and fang, bone and bioplasma. Organisms the size of cities moved in vast, undulating swarms. Capillary towers erupted from vanguard spores, forming armory spines in orbit. They did not roar, they did not speak. They advanced in perfect, predatory unity. The hive mind looked upon the Devourer and attacked. Space trembled with life and malice. The Tyranid hive fleet was a tide of flesh and fang, a swarm that had devoured solar systems and silenced entire civilizations. It came now from the galactic rim, drawn not by scent, not by warp light, but by something far older, an instinct, a challenge. Galactus. Dozens of bioships loomed from the dark, titanic creatures with hulls of chitin and muscle, guided by synapse monsters whose minds were a fraction of the hive mind's vast will. Living torpedoes launched from gaping maws, streaming through space in clouds of acidic mist and tendrils of psychic static. Spore mines bloomed like stars, drifting in arcs toward their target. Leviathans the size of cathedrals opened fire, belching gouts of corrosive plasma and tendrils of raw, devouring psychic force. Mycetic spores clustered into boarding organisms, ready to latch onto something solid and inject hundreds of rippers. The Silver Surfer moved first. He tore through them like a blade through mist. Streaking from the side of Galactus, his silver form blazed through the black like a comet of vengeance. He weaved between streams of bioplasma, spun through the clouds of acidic spores, and unleashed precise, blinding pulses of the power cosmic. Every strike was deliberate, every movement flawless. A Kraken-class bioship lunged, its tendrils tipped with bone blades the size of towers. The Surfer streaked across its flanks, leaving a searing line of energy that shut down its neural pathways. It drifted, paralyzed. Another creature, vast and beetle-like, fired a cluster of psychic projectiles. The Surfer vanished into a blur of light, circled behind it, and tore through its propulsion membrane. It spun wildly, losing all orientation. But the Hive fleet was endless. For every beast he disabled, 2 more emerged. Then Galactus raised his hand. He did not rush, he did not blast. Instead, a pulse of shimmering purple-white light expanded from his palm. It rolled through space like a tide without resistance, silent and absolute. It did not burn, it consumed. The Tyranid assault faltered. Entire broods halted in mid-charge. Hive ships screeched as their chitin cracked and their vital fluids turned to ash. Their eyes, where they had them, went dark. It was not just matter being drawn away. It was essence, soul stuff. Whatever spark the hive mind gave its extensions, Galactus took it. Rivers of colourless flame, invisible to mortal eyes, but screaming in the psychic spectrum, flowed into the god-being. Tendrils of pure life, harvested in a single measured breath. The hive mind reacted, not with fury, with fear. It pulsed across every node, every synapse beast, every gaunt and tyrant. Fear. The Norn Queen turned, abandoning command, Brood nests ejected emergency spores. Hive ships began to pull away, retreating, not from fire or weaponry, but from something they had never truly known. Power they could not overcome. Some of the swarm broke rank and fled. Others turned to fight in desperation, unleashing every bioweapon they possessed. Galactus looked at them, and space ignited. The light from his gaze flared, twin beacons of destruction. Where they struck, nothing remained. No wreckage, no corpses, just dust. Even the hive mind reeled, tendrils of consciousness severed, brood clusters extinguished in moments. Fear turned to desperation, and then to silence. Those that remained fought for seconds longer, then they too were unmade, drained, consumed. Their molecular structure collapsed and repurposed into Galactus's ever-hungry essence. The Silver Surfer returned to his master's side. He said nothing. Another swarm had dared, and another swarm had died. In the Sanctum Strategium beneath the Imperial Palace, silence ruled. The transmission had arrived in full. A probe relay, launched from a fringe outpost of the Adeptus Mechanicus, had captured the battle. Despite interference, despite the psychic static, it had relayed enough. The picked feed showed Galactus hovering in the aftermath, unharmed. The Hive fleet, a vast and terrible force, was gone. Only fragments drifted now. The biomass was drained, psychic links severed. Nothing remained. Roboute Guilliman stood at the centre of the viewing chamber, surrounded by high-ranking members of the Order Xenos, the Librarius Imperialis, and several Mechanicus Magi. No one spoke. Gilliman's hands were clasped tightly behind his back, his jaw set, his expression carved from cold marble. "They failed," he said at last. Zadrax nodded slowly. "Yes, Lord Commander." "And what did it cost them?" "Everything," murmured a tech priest. "The entire splinter fleet. 30 million organisms. All biomass rendered completely inert." Gilliman exhaled slowly. "And we," he said, "have nothing. No weapon that could achieve more than what the Tyranids brought." The silence grew heavy. He stepped forward to the hololithic display, the recording replaying the final moment. Galactus standing above the husk of a consumed hive ship. The stars behind him dimmed. "This is not a force we can conquer through brute strength. Not with Titans, not with Exterminatus, not with the entire fury of the Astartes." He turned to watch the gathered elite. "We are outmatched." One of the High Lords finally spoke. "Then what do we do, Lord Commander?" "We must seek power beyond the Imperium. Allies we would never have considered. Perhaps even enemies. Because if Galactus is not stopped," he paused, "there will be no galaxy left for the Imperium." The room fell into shadow, the stars above flickering like dying candles, and far beyond the reach of their prayers, Galactus turned his gaze to the next world, hungry still. The stars dimmed as Galactus approached. Thundros 11 had once been a lush world, a jewel of organic proliferation. But millennia ago it had been reshaped, converted into a Necron tomb world. Now its crust was honeycombed with ancient circuitry, vast sarcophagi, and slumbering legions of metal warriors. A thin crust of regrown biosphere, had formed over the surface in recent centuries, attracting the attention of lesser races. It had not gone unnoticed, not by Galactus. From the abyss of space, he descended, a titanic shape, rimmed with shifting spectrums of ultraviolet flame. He tore through real space like a wound in the skin of the universe. The very fabric of reality seemed to recoil, folding and twisting around his approach. Nebulas dimmed, stars flickered, uncertain of their own light, and as his form eclipsed the light of the local sun, Galactus arrived. There was no transmission, no declaration, just the soundless, suffocating pressure of inevitability, felt through the warp, through machine spirit relays, through the fractured whispers of ancient Satan shards, long imprisoned beneath the world's crust. He needed no introduction, no prophecy, no warning. Below, the Necron tomb world of Thandros 11 came alive. For 10,000 years it had slept, a sepulchral orb of polished obsidian and subterranean vaults. But Galactus had come drawn not merely by planetary mass, but by the trace echoes of organic life left by explorers. It was enough for his hunger to take notice, and so he had come to feed. But the Necrons did not slumber easily. Deep within the tomb complex, containment fields surged. The fractured minds of Satan shards screamed in spectral rage. Canoptek scarabs flooded from hibernation bays like metal locusts, carrying data, scaffolding, orders. Canoptek spiders and tomb sentinels activated defense protocols that had not been used since before the rise of man. Across the Black Plains, monoliths burst from beneath the surface in gouts of gravitic fire, forming rigid kill lines in precise formations. The sky lit green. From the central necropolis, a transcendent overlord emerged, its necrodermis shimmering with refractive shielding and symbols of dynastic supremacy. A being older than human civilization, its mind was a hypercube of hate and strategy. It looked up and saw the end. The command signal pulsed, and the Necrons unleashed everything. Doomsday arcs locked coordinates and fired. Antimatter lances streaked into the sky, each one capable of vaporizing an Imperium battleship. Annihilation barges poured beams of raw gorse fire that unmade matter on a molecular level. Tesseract vaults, containing the bound essence of Satan fragments, roared like captive suns, unleashing blasts of metaphysical energy that cracked reality itself. Obelisks launched volleys of dimensional flares. Phase pulse artillery arced through the atmosphere. The sky was no longer black. It was green, searing, lethal. And from above, Galactus staggered. Not far, not much, but enough. He halted in his descent, vast arms rising slightly, not in pain, but in acknowledgement. A shift in stance, a faint, momentary ripple in the stellar gravity well around his shoulders, as if the sum total of the Necron arsenal had not injured him, but made him think. Across the tomb world, ancient command cores flickered. Observation, damage probability, less than 0.01%. Secondary analysis, target hesitation confirmed. It was a pause, a flicker, a second that might have been hope. But then, it ended. Galactus lowered his hand, and reached out. The sky dimmed, not from light being absorbed, but from meaning being erased. The very notion of colour faded as the planet's crust began to fracture. Not explode, not through kinetic force, no cataclysmic eruption. Simply crack, like time-worn parchment, as the fundamentals of energy and matter flowed upward in cascading rivers of iridescent essence. The Necrons did not scream, they had no voices, but every data node shuddered with error. Warriors, soulless though they were, ran on energy, on quantum fields and residual echoes of life that had once been flesh. And to Galactus, it was all consumable. Entire phalanxes vanished mid-stride, collapsing like puppets with cut strings as their animating energy was torn from them in long, streaming tendrils. Monoliths flickered and turned to dust. Annihilation barges crumpled in abstract geometry, folding into nothing. The transcendent overlord initiated the Dolmen Gate. A surge of impossible mathematics burst forth, a rip in dimension forming to call for aid, to escape, to warn others. But Galactus closed his fist, and the gate shattered. Not destroyed by heat or impact, denied at a fundamental level. The concept of escape unraveled. The Overlord tried to transmit a final broadcast into the ancient Necron command matrix, but its thoughts evaporated before the code could compile. Across Thandros 11, the final vaults began to fall. Tesseract vaults folded into singularities. The screaming Satan shards within snuffed out like sparks, drowned in a cosmic tide. Planetary control nexuses overloaded. Canoptech constructs spun in confused loops, unable to process what they now saw. Then came the sound, like the sighing of a dying star, like the last breath of a universe. The entire planet began to collapse. The last things to vanish were the monolithic ruins of the Necron dynasty that had ruled in Thandros 11 for millions of years. Galactus hovered in silence, then turned, his gaze scanning beyond, toward the next world. Back on Terra, within the Strategium Maxima. Another world, the servitor intoned. Confirmed. Thandros 11. Absorbed. Necron energy signatures. Terminated. The hologlobe flickered. Where once Thandros 11 had glowed, now there was nothing but the black of interstellar night. Roboute Guilliman said nothing. His gauntlets were curled into fists behind his back. Even the Necrons, whispered Inquisitor Zadrex. They had defences older than the Imperium itself, and it made no difference. Enough, Giliman said. He turned. Bring in the Tau envoy. Now. The Tau emissary stood in the centre of the chamber, dwarfed by the ornate pillars of Imperial design. Dressed in sleek, pearl-grey armour, with the sigil of the ethereal caste etched into his shoulder plate. Onlan Vior did not kneel, but he inclined his head with deliberate respect. Several of our colonies have vanished, he said. Our seers call it the Silent Hunger. Now, thanks to your transmission, we know its name. Gilliman's eyes never left the Xenos' face. Galactus. Yes. You have the data we provided. Onlan nodded. And more. Our spheres detected the loss of Delith Tertius and Sakyar Minor. No warp trace, no radiation decay, merely removal. Gilliman stepped forward. I propose an accord, limited, temporary. You will share your energy analysis, your hyperquantum readings, and temporal displacement data. We will share our scans, psychic assessments, and, if necessary, military support. Even your Astartes, Gilliman narrowed his eyes. If needed. Onla studied the Primarch, then nodded. The greater good demands no less. 3 weeks later, at the joint research site, the Jericho Nexus, it was unprecedented. Tau Earthcast savants stood shoulder to shoulder with Adeptus Mechanicus Magi. Cogitators hummed beside plasmalogic engines. Tau drones relayed data to Imperial servo skulls. The air buzzed with static and tension. Onla entered alongside Gilliman as the lead Magos stepped forward. We have concluded our analysis, said Lexithor. Together. Gilliman's eyes searched the chamber. And? Even with our combined technology, Lexithor said slowly, we simply cannot match his power. Not in direct confrontation. His consumption rate scales geometrically. This power cosmic rewrites energy laws we believed immutable. Onla sighed. We do not even understand what he is, only what he does. Gilliman stared at the central display, a rendering of Galactus draining Thandros 11, devouring both Necron and Biosphere alike. He turned away. Then all this was for nothing. Not nothing, said Onla. There is one more possibility. Gilliman looked up. The Tau Ethereal met his gaze. You saw the Tomb World. You saw what he consumed. And yet, that was merely one Necron world, and they managed to make him hesitate, even for a moment. Lexithor twitched. You speak of their empire. Yes, Onla said. Gilliman stared at him. The Necrons built weapons to enslave gods. They imprisoned beings of unimaginable power and fury. Perhaps the combined power of one Tomb World wasn't enough, but perhaps elsewhere their true power waits. Silence. Gilliman straightened. Then it's time we go knocking on a tomb. The stars beyond the chamber flickered, vast, eternal, and watched now by a hunger that would not cease. In orbit above Cerevis Theta, the Necron tomb world within Segmentum Tempestus, the void above shimmered with caution and tension. From behind a crescent moon, a Tau expeditionary fleet drifted silently in low orbit, their hulls painted in stealth-absorbing blacks and iridescent violet to mask their emissions. Drone carriers released scores of recon probes, each the size of a fire warrior. Their surfaces were lined with sensor arrays and hollow projectors. Their mission: establish contact. Each drone descended in careful, spiraling trajectories, broadcasting on dozens of frequencies: binary, sonic, pheromonal, and psychic. The Tau knew the Necrons could receive many forms of data, but it made no difference. Emerald lances pierced through space. The first drone blinked from existence before it even breached the atmosphere. The second was turned into molten debris by a heat ray projected from orbit itself. The third and fourth were caught in a directed graviton flux and crumpled like paper. All contact attempts suppressed, reported a Tau technician aboard the command vessel Takara. Signal interference increasing. Onla observed the flickering feed with calm precision. Continue. Cycle frequencies. Repeat the broadcasts. Be persistent. Hours passed. Dozens more drones were sent, and dozens more were destroyed. Until one didn't. The final drone, transmitting a direct message of parley in the Necron tongue, Binaric and High Gothic, passed through the death net. It landed and lived. Moments later, an opening appeared in the side of the tomb complex. Not an explosion, not a signal, but simply an invitation. On the surface of Seraphis Theta, on the Obsidian Flats, the Tau delegation arrived first. Onla, surrounded by Earthcast analysts and Firecast escorts, disembarked from a grav sled. Their light armor gleamed softly in the green-lit twilight of the tomb world. The Imperium came next. Roboute Guilliman, clad in the blue-gold armor of a Primarch, stepped from a Thunderhawk flanked by Custodes and representatives of the Order Xenos. The sight of him, 10 feet tall, gleaming with power, drew wary glances even from the Tau. But before them stood a figure from legend, a Necron overlord. His body gleamed with black-polished necrodermis, runes of forgotten dynasties glowing across his armor. His eyes were pale green coals. Around him stood a silent honor guard, each one as still as statues. The Overlord's voice rang out in perfect Gothic. "You come to treat with gods, mortal. Explain yourselves." Giliman stepped forward. "We come not for conquest or peace. We come to speak of a threat that will end you, as it will end all of us." The Overlord's skeletal grin widened. "End us? Your kind is arrogant beyond measure. You presume the silent empire can be ended by anything short of entropy itself. This is no presumption. Galactus has already consumed one of your tomb worlds, Thandros 11. The entire planetary mass drained. Phase energy, Catan shards, all gone." A faint twitch crossed the Overlord's fingers. A lie. Gilliman gestured to a servo skull, which projected the hololithic footage. Thandros 11's surface defense grid lighting up. The battle with Galactus, the pause in his descent, and finally, the quiet, crushing implosion of the planet. He hesitated, Gilliman said, but he still continued. "Your arsenal was mighty, but not enough." Silence. Then the Overlord let out a hollow laugh. Not mirthful, not mocking, just old. "So, the Predator has found something he cannot immediately digest, and now his prey comes begging for an alliance." Onla spoke next. Not begging, reasoning. "You wish to survive, so do we. Let us find the solution together." The Overlord turned, walking toward a long black die lined with floating pylons. "Wait here." He vanished in a shimmer of light. Time passed. No sound, no data, no motion. Gilliman paced slowly, arms behind his back. Onlar remained still, his expression unreadable. "You think they'll agree?" Gilliman asked quietly. "If they don't, they will vanish next. They are logical. They will consider it." Gilliman nodded. "I don't trust them." "Neither do we." Then the air rippled. The Overlord had returned. "We have considered." He looked at both leaders. "You speak of a devourer of worlds. We have records, not of him, but of entities that consume essence, energy beings that stalked the old ones. Your Galactus is a higher order variant, a predator of form, not just substance." He turned to face the horizon. "Such a being cannot be met with brute force, but perhaps," he paused, "perhaps there is something, buried, ancient, forbidden even among us." Gilliman stepped forward. "A weapon?" The Overlord turned. "A concept. One that was locked away before even the war in heaven ended. A device capable of rearranging cosmic constants." Onlar's eyes widened. "You mean to say it may not even exist anymore?" the Overlord interrupted. "But we will look. If we find it, we will call." Gilliman's voice was hard. "If. Do not mistake this for alliance. We share survival, nothing more. But your logic holds. We will search." He raised one long arm, and a green pulse flared into the sky. "Leave this world. We will prepare. And if the weapon still exists, we will find it and notify you." Aboard the Takara, in high orbit, Gilliman and Onlar watched the tomb world vanish behind them as their ships withdrew. "Do you believe him?" Onlar asked. "No." "Then why proceed?" Gilliman stared out at the stars. "Because even lies are better than nothing. And right now, it's all we have to go on." Beyond the ship, the galaxy continued to turn. And somewhere, in the cold between stars, Galactus stirred once more. The Strategium was quieter than it had ever been. No orders, no chatter, just the low thrum of ancient machinery and the hollow wind of changing destiny. Vast hololithic pillars flickered overhead, normally alive with fleet trajectories and system-wide reports, now overridden with a single transmission. One image, one voice, one face, if it could be called that. A towering Necron overlord stood amidst a storm of green static, projected 20 feet tall in the golden chamber. His necrodermis armor had changed since their last encounter, now inscribed with deep, glowing runes that pulsed in recursive, impossible fractal geometries. The codes etched across his surface didn't just shimmer, they shifted, as if alive. Before him stood Roboute Guilliman, clad in the full regalia of the Lord Commander of the Imperium. The light of the hololith cast flickering shadows across his stern face as he stared up at the ancient Xenos being, his arms folded behind his back like a carved statue of patience and wrath. The Overlord inclined his metallic head, not out of respect, but as if acknowledging the end of a calculation. "We have what you seek," the Overlord said, his voice a grave bell echoing through a steel tomb. Gilliman's expression didn't change, but tension gathered behind his eyes. The weapon. Restored, reactivated, remade. The Overlord's eyes flared like twin emerald novas. Its name was erased from code, from history, from neural entanglement, but its purpose remains. It was forged to unravel the architects of your galaxy, to break the old ones, to kill that which cannot be killed. A silence followed. No one breathed. Gilliman exhaled slowly, his voice ironclad. You believe it can stop him? We do not believe, the Overlord answered. We calculate. A flicker of blue flame crossed Gilliman's pauldrons as he shifted, his gaze still locked on the projection. And your price? You will not touch it. You will not study it. You will not ask how it works. The Overlord's voice was colder now, like vacuum chill through ancient corridors. You asked for a weapon. You shall have its fire, but not its secrets. If your kind lays a hand on it, if any organic attempts to decipher its nature, it will unmake the user as swiftly as it unmakes its target. Gilliman's mouth was a hard line. And where do you intend to fire it? The Overlord tilted his head. The lights around him dimmed. Far from any of our tomb worlds, this device does not merely destroy, it alters. The detonation will scar subspace. It will echo across realities. We will not risk its fallout upon our domains. Gilliman nodded once. Then we are agreed. We will draw him to a chosen location, and you, but the Overlord raised a hand. You misunderstand, Primarch. The trap has already been set. Before Gilliman could respond, footsteps echoed across the chamber, soft and deliberate. From the vast archways of the Strategium, flanked by Custodes and Magos in whispered debate, stepped Onlar Vioros, robed in pearl grey with the sigil of the ethereal clasped gleaming on his shoulder plate. He did not speak at first. He simply gazed upward, toward the massive dome of reinforced adamantium glass above. Look up, he said quietly. Gilliman turned. And then for a breathless second, so did the entire chamber. Sirens howled across the Throneworld. A wall of red light erupted across the hololithic domes of the Strategium Maxima as void shields came online. Vox relays screamed with incoming transmissions, half of them corrupted, the other half locked in frantic confirmation. Defense cogitators clicked into alert status. Plasma batteries along Terra's orbital ring began to rotate, locking into defensive arcs. The Phalanx, the ancient fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists, rumbled to life, its macro lances tracking the heavens in stoic silence. Dozens of Mechanicus reactors began power-up sequences that had not been activated since the days of the heresy. The void stirred. Hovering in high orbit above Terra, above the clouds, the shields and the weapon arrays, a single figure waited. Not a demon, not a Xenos warship, a man, or something that wore the shape of one. The Silver Surfer. He stood tall, motionless, a living silhouette of polished cosmic alloy atop his gleaming board. Starlight reflected off his seamless surface, but no heat or motion trailed behind him. He radiated no warp presence, no signature of psychic origin, yet every astropath on Terra screamed in pain when he arrived. and still, he made no move to attack. Instead, he raised one hand and pointed toward the stars. The skies shifted, not from movement, but from pressure. Light itself began to waver, curling around some invisible locus far beyond the system. Stars bent subtly in their patterns. Gravimetric sensors howled warnings. It was not an attack. It was a promise. And then his voice echoed, not through air, not through vox, but through the mind. "People of Terra," the surfer intoned. His voice was filled with quiet finality. "You have one day, one full rotation of your world. Prepare yourselves for the end. My master comes." Silence followed. In the Strategium, every soul stood frozen. For once, even the Mechanicus tech priests did not whisper their litanies. The room held its breath as if daring itself to believe that this was a bluff, some illusion, some trick. Gilliman didn't blink. He turned away from the observation dome, his face hard as ceramite, and looked back to the flickering hololith. The Necron overlord was still there. The transmission shimmered slightly, interference dancing along the runes etched into the skeletal warlord's armor. But his green-lit eyes remained locked with Gilliman's, waiting. "You heard him," Gilliman said, his voice low and iron-bound. "We have one day." The overlord inclined his head a fraction. "Then the time for delays is over," Gilliman continued. "Bring your weapon to Terra. Now. We have no more ground to yield." For a heartbeat, the silence between them deepened. Then the overlord's voice echoed like thunder through tombstone halls. "We are already moving. Our vessel will arrive before your next dusk. But understand, Primarch, when our weapon fires, the bones of your world may tremble." "It already does," Gilliman replied. "But if it must break to survive, so be it." The hololith began to fade. The overlord's final words whispered through the static. "Then pray your emperor watches." And then he was gone. The Strategium dimmed. Gilliman stood for a long moment, unmoving, as the echoes of the Silver Surfer's words pulsed through the noosphere. One day. The weight of 10,000 years settled on his shoulders like a tombstone. He turned toward the stairs leading deeper into the Imperial Palace. A Custodes captain fell into step beside him. "My Lord Gilliman, your orders." Gilliman's voice was quiet but firm. "Send word to all orbital bastions. Begin evacuation of the outer Hive layers. Prepare the phalanx for potential close-range engagement." He paused. "And summon a null-shielded escort." The Custodes looked puzzled. "To where?" Gilliman's eyes were distant now. The stars gleamed in their depths. "To the Golden Throne," he said. "I must speak to him, one last time." Far above Terra, the Silver Surfer waited, still, silent, watching the cradle of humanity spin slowly below. And somewhere, far beyond the veil of stars, a hunger stirred and turned its gaze toward the light. The door to the Sanctum Imperialis hissed open with ancient hydraulics, whispering of 1,000 years of dust and secrecy. Roboute Guilliman stepped beyond the veil of light and shadow, flanked by his null-shielded Custodes escort. Their golden armour gleamed faintly in the candlelit gloom, but none of them dared approach. The Lord Commander walked alone. The golden stair stretched endlessly upward. Each step was bathed in the flickering luminance of sacred votive flames. Every breath he took echoed like thunder in the silence. At the top of it all, the throne, the Emperor, a golden husk, a god entombed in machinery beyond comprehension, an immortal being suspended between death and eternity by the sacrifice of countless psychers each day. Gilliman stopped. He knelt. The silence was absolute. No sound but the thrum of arcane life support. No voices, no commands. Only the weight of a billion hopes pressed into one chamber, onto one being. The Primarch lowered his head. Father, I ask you for your guidance, one final time. He opened his mind, not with words, but with raw thought. Gilliman, warrior of Ultramar, architect of Imperium Secundus, the returned son of the Imperium, laid bare his soul. He showed him the truth, the Necrons, the Tau, the weapon, the surfer, the warning. He showed him Galactus, the end of everything. For a long moment, nothing. But then, light. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't sound. But it thundered through Gilliman's skull like the roar of galaxies collapsing. His knees buckled. Blood dripped from his nose. His eyes glowed with blue fire, as psychic might, ancient and terrible, reached into him like the hand of creation itself. He gasped. "Are you sure?" he said aloud, his voice trembling, his face pale. A pause, then silence again. Gilliman nodded, solemn, grave. "As you command." The great chamber was aflame with energy. Hologlyphic war charts buzzed to life. Orbital defense maps flickered in place, and strategic algorithms screamed under the weight of 1,000,000 recalculations. Gilliman returned, flanked by custodes, face carved in ceramite. He moved with the weight of destiny. Every general, admiral, and commander in the chamber turned. He climbed the central die and took the command throne. Begin evacuation protocols. Murmurs, then silence. All outer Hive levels, all orbital stations without Class X shielding. Clear the lower levels of the Skolem, Administratum, and Astra Telepathica. Move civilians, move assets, move them now. Fleet Marshal Holleck stepped forward. "My lord, are you saying—" Gilliman didn't look at him. "Evacuate the vaults of eternity. Secure the Lexiconum Obscurus, the Genitorium vaults, the archives under Mount Radamanthine. I want all irreplaceable artifacts and gene stock moved off-world now. And the people, Lord Commander." Gilliman looked up slowly. "As many as we can save. Prioritize children, scholars, healers. The rest will have to stand." A stunned silence filled the room. A young Lord Solar stepped forward, pale and shaken. "Is Terra doomed?" Gilliman's gaze hardened. "Do as I command. The Emperor protects." Chaos and order danced across the void in terrifying synchrony. Colossal Adeptus Mechanicus arc ships launched from Naval transports surged from Luna, packed to bursting with civilians and relics. Astra Militarum troop ships formed picket lines around the evacuation zones. Entire Hive sectors collapsed into riots as arbiters and guard forces attempted to maintain order. And overhead, the Silver Surfer still waited. No weapons, no words, just presence, watching, reminding. The Death Watch launched kill teams into subspace to hunt potential Chaos infiltrators. The Sisters of Silence spread null zones across vulnerable psychics. Black ships began launching from Terra in groups of 3, escorted by custodies. In the void, the stars began to dim. The night sky turned red, not with flame, not with dawn, but with something ancient, something unstoppable. A colour not born of light or heat, but of hunger, a crimson that seeped through the stars like blood through water. Galactus had come. He did not descend from the heavens like a comet, nor arrive as a ship might, breaking the veil of atmosphere with fire and thunder. No, he manifested. Reality itself stretched, then tore, like a curtain being pulled apart to reveal something behind it that should never be seen. The stars bent away. Nebulae flickered and died in nearby systems. Even the warp trembled, pulling back as if the Imperium itself refused to touch what was now clawing into the Materium. From orbit, his scale defied understanding. He did not simply appear above Terra, he encompassed it. A god-shaped silhouette unfurling from the void like the universe's own shadow being cast upon itself. Cities went still. Vox signals cut to static. Every mind turned upward. And then from billions of throats across Terra, screaming. Children, priests, soldiers, all looked to the sky and saw not a figure, but their own extinction. Galactus raised a single hand. His movement was slow and deliberate, a gesture that eclipsed continents. Clouds dissolved, atmospheric pressure collapsed in concentric waves, gravitational tides shifted slightly, imperceptibly, but enough that even the oceans began to whisper of unnatural motion. Then, a pulse. Not light, not sound. Something deeper. A thrum that rippled through the crust of the world itself. Glass shattered in Hive cities. Astropaths bled from their eyes. Null zones flickered. Time itself faltered for a heartbeat. The heavens cracked. Not metaphorically. Literally. The sky split as though someone had drawn a line across it with some celestial scalpel, and from the wound in reality, something emerged. A ship. No, a tomb. A Necron warship. Black as the abyss, massive beyond all comparison. Its crescent shape stretched for thousands of kilometers, its surface covered in angular runes that glowed with viridescent fire, green like a dying sun. Ancient power radiated from its every surface, like it had been carved from the corpse of a star. It made no sound. It needed none. Its very presence declared itself. As it slid into the Terran system, the warp howled in retreat. Eldritch phenomena collapsed. Demons screamed for the edges of unreality and vanished. Reality itself tightened like a blade drawn taut. It eclipsed the void, dwarfing the phalanx, and it came alone, because one was all it would take. Within the Strategium Maxima, the chamber was bathed in red warning lights, the hololithic dome above trembling as it attempted to register the Necron vessel's sheer mass. Sensorium priests had fallen to their knees, whispering prayers and scrambling to recalibrate instruments that hadn't been updated in millennia. Roboute Guilliman stood unmoving at the center of the command die, his armor still splattered with soot and data oil from evacuation command centers. Around him, Vox officers barked status reports, data servitors chittered binary distress, and shield operators called out rise and fall in void integrity levels. But Giliman only watched. The hololith above flickered once, then again. Galactus, towering, eternal, hunger given form. And opposite him now, between terror and death, floated the Necron ship. The device within it pulsed once, sending seismic tremors through dozens of Adeptus Mechanicus detection grids on Luna, Mars, and even Titan. And then Gilliman spoke, quietly, just 3 words. Begin the sequence. From the heart of the Necron warship, power began to gather. Not like a cannon charge, not like a reactor. This was something else. Space rippled, subspace twisted, the stars around Terra blinked, not from eclipse but from uncertainty, as though the universe was momentarily unsure of its own laws. A sphere of green-black energy coalesced at the center of the ship's crescent, growing brighter, denser, as time seemed to stretch around it. It did not emit light, it absorbed it, tore it apart. Entire wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum were devoured as the weapon charged. It was not simply an energy weapon. It was a concept incarnate, built not to kill, but to unwrite. And Galactus noticed. He turned, slowly. His immense form shifted, the weight of a dying cosmos behind his gaze, and for the first time since his arrival, since his surfboard-sent Herald had announced the countdown to extinction, Galactus paused, just for a moment. But that moment brought Terra something it hadn't had since the Silver Surfer had appeared. Hope. The moment had come. From the crescent core of the Necron warship, energy coalesced into a singularity of impossible depth. It didn't just glow, it devoured. Time bent, space screamed. Light was unmade into nothing. Then the weapon fired, not with a beam or a blast, but with absence. The void cracked. A rupture in reality surged forth, green and black, silent and absolute. The wave lanced toward Terra with unerring precision, its wake tearing through orbiting wreckage, silencing Vox channels and shorting even the hardiest of Mechanicus wards. And then it missed, or rather, it struck precisely where it had always intended, Terra's outer defenses. Orbital defense rings were shattered. The last surviving batteries of Mars fell silent. The phalanx groaned as key targeting relays were severed. The Necrons had not fired at Galactus. They had fired at Terra. Within the Strategium Maxima, within the Imperial Palace. Lord Commander, the Necrons, they've turned on us. Our void shield regulators are down. The orbital bastions are blind. Phalanx reports catastrophic systems damage. No control of the solar batteries. Gilliman stood in silence at the command throne, his eyes closed for a heartbeat longer than he should have. Around him, the room erupted into shouts, terror, the command chains unravelling. Fleet Marshal Hollick turned to him. "What are your orders, my lord?" "Should we retaliate? Strike at Galactus," cried another, "or target the Necron vessel?" Gilliman opened his eyes. Calm, controlled. His voice, when it came, cut through the chaos like a blade. "Neither." The chamber froze. "We abandon the planet," Gilliman continued. "Begin the final evacuation." There were audible gasps. A dozen high-ranking officers tried to speak at once. "You can't mean... Terra? The throne? What about the Emperor?" But Gilliman did not waver. "You heard me. Final evacuation. Get everyone off-world. However many we can, at least." A Custodes captain stepped forward, his gauntleted hand over his chest. "We will not leave him." Gilliman turned to face them. There were thousands still on Terra. Tech priests, scribes, sisters of battle, loyal guardsmen. But it was the Custodes that stood the tallest, and none moved. Gilliman's voice broke with sorrow, but not weakness. "You must stand down. The Emperor, he would not want this." But the Golden Warriors remained still. "Then may the Emperor protect you," Gilliman whispered. He turned away. Flames licked at the edges of transport pads as thunderhawks roared into the sky. Skitarii herded scholars and scribes aboard the packed ships. Children clutched relics. Saint statues were torn from their pedestals and loaded like war gear. Vault servitors wheeled gene stocks and forbidden tombs into ancient transports. Gilliman strode through the last loading ramp, vox-hailers echoing in the background. Billions remained, but some had made it at least. Enough to start again. From orbit, Gilliman watched as Galactus lowered his hand. A beam of coronal energy, cosmic and absolute, surged down from the Devourer's palm. Terra began to break, not explode, but dissolve. The planet crumbled like ash sucked into a black hole. Oceans boiled. The mountains seemed to evaporate. Hive cities consumed by waves of null energy. The throne, and all upon it, disappeared into the light. "My lord," a Vox serf said, their voice trembling. "The Necron ship. It is hailing us." Gilliman didn't move for a moment, and then, "Accept the transmission." The hololith flickered. The overlord appeared once more, wreathed in emerald light. His face, eternal and unchanging, bore something that might have been smugness. "And thus ends the cradle of man," the overlord intoned. "You are a curious species. You survive longer than you should, but still, you trust, and for that, you die." Gilliman said nothing. The overlord continued. "We never needed your alliance. We desired only to see the death of your pathetic Throneworld with our own eyes. Consider this, the end of one age, the age of man." He paused. "And the return of ours." But Gilliman was smiling. Not warmly, not in defeat, but knowingly. And then the sky tore open again. A rift. The warp itself opened. Where Terra had once floated, now a howling vortex of unreality screamed into the black. Lightning in unnatural colours surged outward. Screeching warp beasts poured forth. Bladed horrors, demons of every god. The eye of Terra widened. The Chaos Gods had felt it. The Emperor had been the dam, but now he was gone, and nothing remained to hold the warp at bay. From the rift, armadas of living nightmares began to surge forth. The Necron overlord turned. For the first time, he was uncertain. What is this? Giliman took a step forward into the hololithic frame. You betrayed the Alliance, and played your part very well. The Overlord's optics narrowed. Gilliman's smile grew. We knew you couldn't be trusted, but you were loud enough to draw them out. As the Chaos fleet turned its full wrath toward the Necron ship, Galactus looked back. He saw the rift. He felt it. A well of infinite hunger, madness, and energy beyond imagining. A deeper power than even the death of a planet. He turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the warp. No, the Overlord growled. This was not part of the agreement. There was no agreement, Gilliman replied. And then, the Emperor protects. He cut the signal. The bridge of the Invictus went silent. All eyes turned toward the viewing dome. Galactus moved. His cosmic form glided into the rift. The Silver Surfer followed. And then, Gilliman muttered to himself, too quiet for others to hear. Come on, take the bait. Silence. Then finally he exhaled. He took it. The warp rift snapped closed, and they were gone. Silence. All that remained of Terra was ash, light, and dust. The rift was closed. The Necron warship still burned, beset on all sides by demonic entities. Green lances fired desperately, but they were too late and too few. Its runes dimmed as the tides of the Imperium tore into its impossible alloys. Gilliman stood alone at the forward viewport. He turned to his officers. Begin withdrawal. Full sector retreat. Leave the Necrons to their fate. Where to, my lord? A young captain asked. Gilliman looked into the stars. Wherever we go next. The Emperor saw this. He prepared us. We move to the next phase of his will. Gilliman stood silently at the command die. The void stretched out before him. Behind his eyes, the ghost of Terra still burned. Billions lost. A golden throne gone silent. A god extinguished. And yet, hope remained. He turned his gaze to the dark where the rift had once been, now sealed, but the sensors flickered, momentarily, registering an echo, a gravitational ripple, a whisper of reality folding into something else. In the warp, the impossible happened. Inside the screaming tides of unreality, Galactus had arrived. Demons scattered like insects from a dying flame. Realms collapsed. Entire warp storms were consumed in seconds. Galactus, undaunted by madness, moved like inevitability made flesh, drawn by the raw, endless energy of chaos itself. And then he began to feed. Warp space screamed. Even the Silver Surfer looked upon the horror with something close to awe. He followed his master into the churning ether as galaxies wept.